The rain fell like a heavy veil over the streets of Willow Creek, but nothing seemed capable of silencing the agonizing cry that came from the edge of the dumpster. Savannah, her hair soaked and hands covered in trash, approached cautiously, but something deep in her chest urged her to take a closer look. Amid the debris, there was a man, injured, lost, and strangely wearing expensive clothes. Her instincts led her to do the unthinkable: save him. But who was this man? And what would happen to her after making that choice? But what came next, no one could have imagined. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments, where are you listening from? Your support is what keeps this channel alive. The night was heavy, a dark cloak covering the small, dirty alleys of Willow Creek. The wind howled through the narrow streets, scattering trash, papers, and the scent of neglect. Savannah Morgan, 26 years old, lived on the fringes of society, a survivor who knew every corner of that marginalized neighborhood. Her job was simple: collect recyclables from the city's debris, searching for what others had discarded. But on that day, fate had something different in store for her. The rain was relentless, beating against the ground as if the sky wanted to wash away everything that existed. She huddled beneath her raincoat, trying to protect the little she had gathered that day. Walking among cardboard boxes and food scraps, she heard the sound of something falling to the ground, her eyes fixed on the figure lying there beside a large dumpster. At first, she thought it was just another homeless person who had collapsed, perhaps a drunk or someone who couldn't find shelter. But then, the wind blew differently, revealing a detail that made her stop immediately. The man was wearing expensive clothes, a dark suit stained by the street's dirt, but still distinctive. Her mind sought answers to that strange sight. Who could someone so well-dressed, so out of place in this reality, be lying among the trash of Willow Creek? The man appeared unconscious, his breath shallow and irregular, as though he was on the verge of death. Savannah felt a sharp pang of fear mixed with curiosity. The streets were empty, and she knew that if she left him there, maybe no one else would find him. Something inside her stirred. She was used to being alone, but never with a sense of urgency like this. Without thinking, she knelt beside him, touching his cold skin, trying to determine if he was still alive. Her fingers, trembling with cold and concern, felt the weak pulse of his heart. He was breathing, but barely. The decision was quick, almost instinctive. Savannah knew she couldn't leave him there. She didn't know who he was, where he came from, or what he was doing in that situation, but something inside her forced her to act. With effort, she partially lifted him, supporting his body against hers, struggling not to succumb to his weight. She knew of a place that could offer some shelter, her makeshift shack at the end of a dark alley. It wasn't the best place, but in those conditions, it was the only one she had. Her steps dragged across the sidewalk, the man, unaware, being guided to the only safety Savannah could offer. She laid him down on the small makeshift bed that barely fit her. The sound of the rain outside was the only thing breaking the silence of the moment. She stared at him for a moment, her eyes fixed on his battered, pale face. He looked so out of place, and she, in her own misery, so unable to understand what fate was trying to show her. Savannah slowly stepped away, giving herself space to breathe. She knew this decision would change everything. But as strong as her instincts had been, one thought haunted her. Who was this man, and what had she just brought into her life? She looked out the window, the rain pounding heavily outside, as if the world around her was immersed in a deep silence, waiting for what would come next. Lucas Whitmore woke with a start, his heart pounding, as if he had been torn from a dark nightmare. He blinked, trying to focus his eyes on something familiar, but nothing around him seemed familiar. The walls were made of aged wood, a thick blanket covered him, and the scent of rain and earth filled the air. This wasn't a place he was used to being. His fingers moved involuntarily, trying to understand what was happening, And it was then that he realized he didn't even know his own name. His body ached, marked by something he couldn't remember. His chest burned, and a feeling of emptiness enveloped him. He sat up slowly, the movement weighing heavily on his body, as if he had been broken into 1,000 pieces. His head throbbed, and he tried to recall something, anything, that could explain why he was here. But his mind was empty, a silent abyss where nothingness reigned. The only remnants were fragments of something distant, something he couldn't quite reach. As he struggled to piece things together, a figure appeared in the doorway. A young woman with wet hair and an attentive expression, but also a hint of exhaustion in her eyes. Savannah Morgan, she introduced herself when their gazes met. She was crouching down, holding a small bowl of water and a piece of bread. Her eyes were kind, yet there was something vulnerable in her look, as if she herself carried an invisible weight. But still, her gesture was one of warmth, not judgment. "Are you okay?" Her voice was gentle, but carried a firmness that made Lucas feel, in some way, safe, despite everything. He tried to speak, but the word got stuck in his throat, as if it were impossible to reclaim an identity he couldn't remember. Savannah moved closer to him, with a calm smile, placing the bowl of water in his hands. "You must be thirsty." She crouched next to him, watching him carefully. "I found you on the street, near a dumpster. You were hurt and unconscious." Her voice was calm, but there was a silent sadness in her words. Lucas looked at his hands, still trembling slightly, then turned his gaze back to her, who was watching him with a mix of compassion and curiosity. "I don't remember anything." His voice sounded weak, almost unrecognizable, as if he were still trying to come back to himself. Savannah nodded, understanding the pain of having no memories, of not knowing who you are. "That's normal. It could be shock," she said, in a voice that seemed all too familiar with dealing with pain and forgetfulness. "You're safe here. I don't have much, but you can rest." She paused, almost as if she were weighing her own words, then continued, "I can't promise anything, but while you're here, I'll take care of you. That's all I can do." Savannah, with a simple gesture, ran her hand through her damp hair, clearly trying to calm herself, while offering something that, in her heart, seemed sincere. A temporary shelter, a refuge amid chaos. Lucas looked at the woman in front of him, trying to process everything she was saying. He felt lost, but her presence wasn't threatening. In fact, there was something about her that exuded a nearly maternal calmness. She helped him adjust on the makeshift bed, arranging the blankets and adjusting his posture, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. He felt protected, but still distant, as if he were merely observing life through a fogged-up window. Then he noticed something odd: the ring on his finger. He looked in surprise at the gold band that adorned his finger, a detail that didn't match the situation. The ring seemed expensive, with a design that didn't fit the lifestyle he now seemed to be living. Then there was the suit, even though it was stained and dirty, still of superior quality, impeccably cut. How could he have fallen so low, lost even his identity, and still be wearing something so formal? Savannah seemed to notice the change in his expression. Her eyes narrowed for a moment, and a shadow of understanding passed through her. "You're not from here, are you?" she asked softly, without judgment. "I know I can't ask much, but you don't fit in this place." Lucas fell silent, feeling the weight of his expensive clothes, the shine of his ring. None of it made sense. He didn't know who he was, but he knew this wasn't his reality. There was something more, something he couldn't understand. All he felt was a strong need to uncover the truth, something that seemed to be his only instinct. Savannah, with a soft sigh, stepped back, but before leaving she looked at him once more, as if trying to understand what he was, who he was. "I know you have no memories, but for now, you can stay. There's no rush for anything. Lucas watched her leave, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and confusion. He was safe, but he didn't know what that truly meant. Who was he really? And more importantly, what would he do now, with no idea of who he had been, before waking up in that makeshift shack? And deep down, he knew that the warmth of this improvised home wouldn't last forever. The days passed slowly, as if time itself had decided to take a pause in this corner of Willow Creek. Savannah and Lucas grew accustomed to each other's presence, and the rhythm of a routine that once felt monotonous to her began to weave into something new, something that couldn't be explained with just words. She, so used to solitude, looked at him with suspicion at first. He, as lost as she was, observed everything with shy curiosity, almost as if he feared being rejected once again. But little by little, something began to change between them. Lucas, with no clear memories but a gentleness that shone through every gesture, began offering to help Savannah with the daily tasks. At first, she hesitated. She knew that nothing in her life happened without reason, and Lucas's offer of help seemed strange. She was used to doing everything on her own, carrying the weight of her life on her shoulders. But when she looked at him, with those deep eyes and sincere expression, something softened inside her. He didn't seem threatening. In fact, he seemed lost, just like her. It was then that the next morning she guided him through the streets of Willow Creek, showing him the spots where she typically searched for recyclable materials. The sky was overcast, and the street was empty, as always. The sound of their footsteps on the wet pavement filled the silence as she moved quickly, as she always did, not allowing room for unnecessary thoughts. But Lucas followed beside her, trying to adjust to her pace. The first time he knelt to pick up a piece of cardboard that had fallen to the ground, Savannah watched him, a little surprised. He did it without hesitation, as if it were something natural for him, as if he wasn't a man who, at some point, had been a part of a world she could barely imagine. He stood up with a shy smile and said, "I think I'm starting to understand how this works." She didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded, picking up another piece of cardboard. They didn't exchange many words, but the silence shared between them was comfortable. As time passed, something peculiar began to happen. The simple exchanges of glances between them, the shy laughter that escaped during casual conversations about what they found on the streets, began to create a sort of bond. Savannah realized that, without having planned it, his presence was no longer just a distraction, but something that filled the emptiness of her life in a new way, and perhaps unexpectedly. That afternoon, after a long day of work, Savannah sat on the ground near an abandoned shack and began preparing a simple lunch, rice and beans, the basics. Lucas, still somewhat uncomfortable with the simplicity of the meal, sat beside her, watching her cook. She glanced at him, a little surprised by his silent demeanor, and gave a small smile. "It's simple, but it works," she said, as if justifying the lack of options. He merely nodded, and with a smile replied, "I never thought such a simple dish could taste so good." She smiled, and in that moment he realized that their laughter was no longer awkward or shy. They were beginning to know each other, to build something that, until then, had seemed improbable. Savannah began to open up a little more to him, though still with caution. She talked about the hard days she had gone through, about her struggle to survive, about the loneliness that consumed her with each new dawn. Lucas, on the other hand, didn't know what to say, but he listened. He listened attentively, with a calmness that he didn't quite understand, coming from somewhere deep inside him. He felt a growing connection to her, something that went beyond any logical explanation. He was beginning to find, in Savannah's simple routine, something that made him feel at home. The sun set each night, lighting up Savannah's shack in a soft, golden glow, and the two of them found themselves sitting together, sharing the little they had, yet feeling richer than they had ever been. Between the few words exchanged, the hours seemed to pass more quickly, and the day's tensions seemed to fade away. The shy laughter from Lucas, even though born from inexperience, became a sound Savannah began to look forward to. There was something in his lightness, something in the way he was, that made the place where she lived more bearable, more human. Savannah began to realize that Lucas wasn't just a lost man. He was someone who, despite his lack of memory, carried with him an essence she still couldn't fully understand. He made her feel that, even amidst poverty and abandonment, there was something dignified in her life, something she was beginning to rediscover through him. And, in the midst of the comfortable silence that was forming between them, Savannah began to perceive something even deeper. Lucas wasn't just there to help her with the tasks, he was there to help her heal, to reclaim the trust she had lost over time. And somehow, she was starting to do the same for him, without it being spoken in words. There was no longer so much space for distrust. Instead, there were shared laughs, accidental touches, and glances that said everything without a single word. When the sun finally set and the night embraced the neighborhood with its dark cloak, the two of them were sitting together, eating simply but with lighter hearts. There were no promises made, no declarations of love, but something deeper was beginning to grow between them. A silent connection, built in the midst of difficulty, but unshakable. The evening was drawing near, painting the sky with golden and orange hues as the soft light enveloped the scrapyard where Savannah and Lucas rested under a solitary tree. The warm afternoon breeze gently swayed the leaves around them, and the sound of the wind seemed, in some way, to ease the tension of the day. The atmosphere was quiet, but there was something comforting in the silence they shared. There was no rush, no expectations, just the sound of time passing slowly. Savannah leaned back against the trunk of the tree, her legs stretched out and her eyes lost in the horizon. She felt the weight of life, like an invisible shadow hovering over her. But in that moment, with the warmth of the sun touching her skin and the quiet company of Lucas, she allowed herself to relax. Never before, she thought, had she felt so comfortable simply existing next to someone. There were no pressures, just each other's presence, and that was more than she could ask for. "You know," she began, breaking the silence, her voice soft, almost as if she were opening up to herself. Lucas, who had been watching the movement of the leaves, turned his head to look at her. "I've always dreamed of having my own bakery. When I was younger, my mom taught me how to make cakes and sweets, and I fell in love with it. It was the only thing that gave me peace. But life..." She paused, her gaze drifting into the emptiness ahead. "Life took everything from me." Lucas watched her attentively, noticing the sadness that had settled in her eyes. He didn't know exactly what she had gone through, but he felt the pain in her voice, in every word she spoke. She continued, as if the words needed to come out, as if the confession was a way to relieve the weight she carried. "When I was little, I imagined myself growing up in a little shop, with a counter full of colorful sweets and a smile on my face. But as time passed, reality pulled me away from my dreams. My mom died young, and my dad, well, he was never around. I ended up on the streets, surviving as best I could." She looked at her hands, as if trying to find a sign that something of the dreaming girl she once was still remained. "I never had a chance to live that dream. Maybe I lost that chance long before I found this place. But still, from time to time, I catch myself wondering what it would have been like if I had made it. And then, I ask myself if it's worth dreaming again." The last word hung in the air, a sweet and bitter melancholy that seemed to wrap around the silence. Lucas stayed silent for a moment, Savannah's words reverberating in his mind. He knew she was talking about the pain of a lost dream, but there was something in her that was asking for more than just compassion. She was asking for understanding, a genuine connection. With a quiet sigh, Lucas shifted closer to her, still looking at the horizon, but now completely immersed in his own thoughts. He felt an urge to share something that had been trapped in his mind, like a memory that always seemed to slip away but never ceased to bother him. Something told him that, in this moment, perhaps it was time to share the weight he carried, even without knowing how much it would mean to him. I don't know who I am, Savannah," he began, his voice low, laden with an emotion he rarely showed. "But somehow, I feel like I have something that's lost within me, something big, something powerful. I have flashes of memories, and in some of them, I see myself making important decisions that affected many people. I see myself in luxurious places, surrounded by people talking about business and power, and I feel like I was someone important, but I can't remember enough. I don't know who I was, but I know there was a responsibility, something heavy." Savannah looked at him, surprised, but not with judgment. The sincerity in his voice, the suffering he expressed, made him even more human and vulnerable in her eyes. She knew she couldn't understand everything he was going through, but what she saw in him wasn't just a man physically lost. He was also lost in his own memories, trying to understand who he was, what it all meant. "I don't know who you are, Lucas, but maybe we're more alike than we think," she said, her voice softer now, with an empathy only someone who had also known pain could offer. "Sometimes life takes everything we've dreamed of, but maybe that's not the end. Maybe it's the beginning of something new. Not the same, but something better. Something we can't even imagine." He watched her for a long moment, his gaze absorbing the silent strength in her, the way she seemed to find meaning even in the deepest losses. She didn't conform, but she allowed herself to keep going, and that, in some way, was what he needed to learn the most. "Do you think it's possible," he asked, almost with a sigh, "that we can somehow find our dreams again, even after everything?" Savannah smiled, a smile that seemed to carry a subtle hope. "I think so. Because if we don't believe there's something more for us, what else do we have left?" The sun was setting, painting the sky with intense and deep colors, reflecting in their eyes like a promise of what was still to come. In the silence that followed, both of them felt, for the first time in a long time, that perhaps there was something beyond what they had lost. Something new, something that united them in a way neither of them could fully understand, but that seemed to be growing with every breath they took. The days following their mutual confession seemed to pass more slowly, as if the world had slowed down its pace. The silent connection between Savannah and Lucas grew, little by little, with each gesture of care and understanding. But within him, there was a silent battle taking place, an internal struggle against a void that seemed to expand as he spent more time there, in her company. What he knew of himself was beginning to resurface in disconnected fragments, as if his memories were shattering and rearranging themselves. Nothing was clear, but there were flashes of something big, something important. On a hot afternoon, when the summer heat began to invade the narrow streets of Willow Creek, Lucas woke from a nightmare. He was alone in a vast building surrounded by unfamiliar faces, and he heard his name being repeated amid a growing noise of voices. He was strapped to a glass table, papers scattered, contracts and agreements being discussed in an urgent tone. What he felt there wasn't just the fatigue of a demanding life, but something deeper, a betrayal perhaps. He tried to get up, but something held him back, and in that moment, something broke within him. The name came to him with full force. Lucas Whitmore. He was the CEO of Whitmore Global, one of the largest multinational companies in the country. He woke abruptly, his heart racing and the memories still swirling in his mind. He stared at the ceiling, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of what was happening. That was the first complete memory he had, but how was that possible? He looked at his trembling hands, then at his reflection in a broken piece of glass. The man he saw wasn't the same anymore, he knew that. But who was he now? And what had he done to end up here, in this dark alley, with a life slipping through his fingers? Savannah was sitting in her usual corner, her eyes fixed on a page of a book, when Lucas approached her. He watched her in silence, the familiarity of her presence creating a mixture of comfort and confusion within him. He wanted to speak, but the words still seemed to escape him. It was she who raised her eyes first, with a calm and welcoming look, but there was something new in her gaze now, something he couldn't fully decipher, but that felt familiar in some way. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice as gentle as it always was. But there was something new in her eyes now, something that he couldn't fully understand yet, but that made him feel safe. He hesitated for a moment. I started to remember some things. He sat beside her, trying to organize his thoughts. "My name is Lucas Whitmore. I'm the CEO of Whitmore Global." He paused, as if the words didn't carry the full weight of what he was trying to say. "But this doesn't feel right. I don't know who I am anymore. What I was no longer makes sense." Savannah didn't immediately respond. She looked at him, not with curiosity, but with a silent compassion. She knew that the pain he carried wasn't visible, but it was there, deep in every word he spoke. The silence between them was broken only by the soft sound of rain starting to fall. She could see he was falling apart, but she didn't know how to help him piece it together. "And what will you do now?" she asked, her voice low, but filled with genuine concern. He looked at her, his eyes marked by the turmoil of his fragmented memories. "I need to face my past, the people I betrayed, the mistakes I made. I need to do this on my own, but I can't keep living here in this illusion." Those words, spoken with quiet firmness, weighed in the air between them. Savannah swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those words more than she could imagine. She knew what Lucas was saying was true. He was lost, but he also needed to find himself again. She felt a silent ache in her chest, as if she were about to lose something she didn't yet fully understand. But then, before she could respond, Lucas leaned in, his eyes meeting hers. There was something in his expression that seemed to speak more than any words could say. He was there, in front of her, his eyes fixed on hers, as if he wanted to apologize without saying anything. Savannah froze, feeling her heart race. Without warning, Lucas moved closer and kissed her. It was a soft kiss, but it was filled with a quiet pain. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of silent sorrow and a truth shared between them. He was saying goodbye, but at the same time, something in his touch told her that he didn't want to leave, that he wasn't ready to let her go, but he knew he had to. The kiss was a bond, a silent connection that sealed what couldn't be said. When he pulled away, the expression in Savannah's eyes was unreadable. She watched him, trying to understand what had just happened, trying to comprehend what this meant for her, for them. "I need to go," Lucas said, his voice choked, but with a tone of determination. "But I promise, Savannah, I'll come back." Savannah didn't know what to say. She just looked at him, feeling a mixture of relief and pain. She knew that perhaps this was their last moment together, or maybe it was the first of something bigger, something that time would reveal. With one last look, Lucas stood up and, without another word, walked away. And as she watched him disappear into the rain, Savannah felt that something had changed, something inside her, something she still couldn't fully understand. She allowed herself to close her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. She didn't know what the future held for them, but deep down she knew that this was only a pause, because somehow she felt that their destinies were far from finished. The sound of the rain was gentler that morning, but the weight of the world still seemed to drag on Savannah's shoulders. She walked through the streets of Willow Creek, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her worn-out jacket, her thoughts tangled in something she didn't want to face. The truth she had felt deep in her heart in the days after Lucas's departure was about to materialize in a way she couldn't have predicted. What she didn't know was that reality, as always, had a cruel way of revealing itself. Savannah entered a small pawn shop with no clear purpose in mind, just the need to distract herself from the coldness of her little shelter and the loneliness that seemed to grow with each passing day. As she passed the window, something caught her attention. The screen of a television was showing an image that immediately made her stop in the middle of the shop. It was him, Lucas Whitmore. He was there, on the news, in the spotlight. His image was displayed on the big screen, his face impassive and distant, surrounded by flashes from cameras and reporters asking rapid questions. The words coming from the anchor, however, made her heart race. CEO of Whitmore Global, Lucas Whitmore, is returning to the market after a long period of seclusion. Considered one of the most powerful men in the country, he says he is ready to take back control of his company and face the challenges that await him. Savannah froze. She didn't know what to do, what to think. The man she had helped, the man she believed was just a lost soul, was now standing before her as a powerful figure. He was no longer the man she found in the trash in Willow Creek. He was no longer the vulnerable man she had cared for so deeply. He was a CEO, a businessman, someone she couldn't even imagine. What she felt was not only surprise, but something deeper, something that mixed with pain and resentment. She had been used, deceived, not only by him, but also by her own illusion that something could happen between them. She felt foolish, believing for a moment that he could be more than what his social position dictated. She knew he needed to remember who he was, but no one had told her that his return to his old life would be so devastating for her. She stared at the TV screen, trying to distance herself from her emotions. He was smiling, greeting journalists, and surrounding himself with people who probably knew much more about him than she ever had. But what hurt the most was the fact that now she knew he would never return to her. He had never been someone she could share her life with. He was someone from a world she could never reach. Before she could turn and leave the shop, a familiar voice echoed from behind her. "Savannah." She turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway of the shop. Lucas Whitmore. He was watching her with a look that seemed regretful, as if he were trying to say something, but didn't know how. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice laden with an emotion she couldn't hide. "Why? Are you looking for me now?" Lucas hesitated, as if the words didn't come easily. He seemed unsettled, but also at peace with himself. "I wanted to talk to you. I don't know how to explain everything. I didn't expect this to happen. I know I pulled away, but I didn't know what I was doing, Savannah. I went after my past, and now I see I owe you something." Savannah looked at him, trying to control the anger burning inside her. "A debt? You think you can give me something now? After everything that happened, after everything you did, you think an explanation is going to change things?" She took a step forward, her heart pounding. "You can't just disappear from my life and then come back as if nothing happened. I helped you, Lucas. I gave you what little I had, and now you show up here, trying to convince me that everything you did was for some good reason." Lucas lowered his head, as if absorbing her words. He seemed to have something important to say, but didn't know how to express it. "I know I can't go back, but I'd like to do things differently. I need someone like you in my life, someone who can help me find myself again. And I know I'm asking a lot, but I want to offer you a job, a position." Savannah looked at him, incredulous. "You're offering me a job as an assistant?" She laughed, but there was no humor in her smile. "And you think, after everything, I would agree to work for you? As if I were just another piece in your game of power? He watched her, his eyes fixed on hers, trying to convey sincerity. I know all of this seems ridiculous now, but I don't know where else to turn. And I'm not asking you to forgive me, Savannah. I just want to give you an opportunity, something you deserve. You were the only person who gave me something real, and I don't want you to see me as the villain of this story. I'm not that man anymore. She interrupted him, her voice firm. If you want me to accept, Lucas, there's one condition. Between us now, only business, nothing personal. I'll work for you, but don't expect me to forget everything that happened. You can't come back and make things seem good now. I know who you are, and that's the only way to move forward. Lucas looked at her with a sigh of resignation, but he knew he had nothing else to offer but this proposal. I understand. Just let me show you that I can be someone different. For you, for me. Savannah looked at him one last time, feeling the weight of the decision she was making. She knew that accepting the job would mean more than just work. It would be a challenge. It would be another battle against memories and broken promises. But at the same time, it was the only way to regain control of her life. The only path she could take now. All right, she said, her voice steady. But remember, Lucas, only business. Nai. The Whitmore Global building was imposing. Its glass facade reflected the city around it, like a curtain of mirrors concealing the secrets of a corporate empire. Inside, the atmosphere was always the same, perfectly calculated, with shiny floors and glass tables, exuding sophistication and control. It was Lucas Whitmore's domain, and now, in some way, Savannah was a part of it. She entered the building for the first time as an employee of the company, feeling a lump in her throat at the sight of its grandeur. The glass walls and expansive meeting rooms, with walls lined with dark wood panels, seemed more distant from her reality than she could have imagined. But at the same time, there was a sense of power, of being at the heart of something big, something she never would have thought was possible for herself. She felt small. Yet, at the same time, a sense of determination filled her. She was going to prove her worth because deep down, she knew this place wasn't her final destination. It was just a passage, and she would play her part, as she always had. Over the first few weeks, Savannah proved herself impeccable in her work. She was organized, efficient, always ahead of what was expected of her. Her spreadsheets were detailed, her notes meticulous. Her colleagues began to notice her competence. But deep down, there was something they couldn't see. Something that connected her to Lucas Whitmore. Something he knew, but that no one else seemed to notice. As the meetings unfolded, she found herself beside him, often feeling the discreet glances they exchanged amidst the corporate debate. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it said more than any word could. Sometimes, when he looked at her, the smile that appeared at the corner of his lips was almost hidden, as if he were trying to conceal something he knew, but she didn't yet. There was a silent communication between them, a tension that didn't dissipate but only grew. Savannah focused on her work, trying not to get too involved. She didn't want anyone to know about the moments they shared, even if it was just a fleeting glance or a quick exchange of words between the glass walls. They had agreed firmly that everything between them would now be strictly business, but what was happening on the underlying level between them wasn't so simple to define. Lucas's glances always seemed laden with something more. She could feel the pressure of his gaze on her, not just on her professional performance, but on something far more complex, something she wasn't ready to face. Other employees began to notice the different dynamic between them, but no one dared to comment. There was something strange about how Savannah was always beside Lucas in the most important meetings, but no one knew for sure whether it was just a coincidence or something more. The dynamic between the two of them became more tense as the days went by. It was as if the room closed around them with every exchanged look, every unspoken word. Then Maxwell Whitmore, Lucas's brother. entered the scene. He was the opposite of Lucas, extroverted, confident, and always with an easy smile on his lips. He had an energy that filled any room, but there was something in his eyes that didn't go unnoticed by Savannah. He had a sharp gaze, as if he were always observing, always analyzing every movement. And soon he began to notice the way Savannah and Lucas behaved around each other. In a particularly tense meeting, Maxwell leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Lucas and Savannah. The meeting had ended, but he didn't seem willing to leave the room just yet. Lucas was organizing his notes, his eyes focused on the paper, while Savannah, as always, was concentrated on her work. But something in the air had changed. Maxwell broke the silence. "So, Lucas," Maxwell said, his voice casual but with a hint of curiosity, "how's the new project going with our assistant?" He looked at Savannah with an enigmatic smile. "I think she's been a great addition to the team, hasn't she? Or are you more involved than expected?" Maxwell's remark was like a bolt of lightning across the room. Savannah felt the heat rise in her neck, a sudden nervousness that made her glance at Lucas, but he was absorbed in his papers, unwilling to engage in his brother's game. But she knew what was happening. He knew what Maxwell was insinuating. The glance between the two brothers was brief, but loaded with something Savannah couldn't ignore. And she knew she couldn't keep ignoring what was growing between her and Lucas. The tension was palpable, almost impossible to deny. Maxwell moved closer to Savannah's desk, smiling relaxedly. "You know, if you ever need more responsibilities, just let me know. I don't know if you've noticed, but Lucas always picks people with more care than you might think." He smiled again, as if making a joke, but his eyes were watching her every reaction, waiting for a sign he knew was there, but one she wasn't ready to give. Savannah stood her ground. "I understand, and I really appreciate the opportunity to work here. Helping the company grow is the only thing that matters to me." She looked at Lucas, her gaze firm and impassive. "For now, I don't see the need for anything beyond what I'm already doing." Maxwell, apparently satisfied with her response, took a step back, but the smile on his lips never fully disappeared. He was playing his game, and Savannah knew it. He was beginning to suspect something, and she could feel the pressure mounting. She knew she couldn't let this tension evolve into something bigger. She needed something clearer, more defined, and whatever was happening between her and Lucas had to stay at the professional level, at the business level. But as she left the room, the glance exchanged between her and Lucas remained like a silent flame. She didn't know what he was thinking, but she could feel he was aware that things had changed. What was between them now could no longer be ignored. Doubt hung in the air, like a silent promise. The atmosphere at Whitmore Global had shifted drastically in the past few weeks. The tensions in the air were no longer just noticeable, but oppressive. Each meeting seemed like a hidden battlefield where unspoken words and furtive glances were the only weapons. Maxwell Whitmore, with his charming yet deceitful personality, had a way of manipulating any situation to his favor, and he was ready to make his move. He wanted more than just power within the company. He wanted Lucas out of the picture, and more than that, he wanted to bring Savannah down. He knew he had to be careful. He couldn't be too obvious. But what he didn't anticipate was that Savannah wouldn't be so easy to destroy. She was smart, driven, and above all, unafraid of facing challenges when things got complicated. However, what she didn't know was that she was about to fall into a trap so well crafted that her chances of defending herself would be minimal. Maxwell wasn't just trying to gain power within the company. He wanted to watch Lucas fall victim to his own weakness. He knew that the bond between Lucas and Savannah, though subtle, was growing. They shared a painful past and a silent attraction that Maxwell recognized as dangerous. But what he didn't know was that he could use that against them. On a quiet afternoon, when the office was especially still, Maxwell saw the perfect opportunity. He had planted false digital evidence, creating a network of emails and financial transactions that made it appear as though Savannah was leaking confidential information to the competition. He knew that if those pieces of evidence came to light, they would be enough to ruin her career. He was careful to cover his tracks, making it difficult for anyone to realize that the entire setup was a carefully orchestrated fraud. When the evidence found its way into Lucas's hands, he didn't believe it at first. He couldn't. Savannah had been an integral part of his team, and he knew how dedicated she was to her work. But the pressure was mounting. Rumors inside the company began to spread, and he couldn't ignore the facts that were being presented to him, even though deep down he felt something wasn't right. It was during a critical meeting with the company's board that the truth, or what seemed to be the truth, was revealed. Lucas found himself in the eye of a storm. His eyes were fixed on the documents on the table, the images of the emails, and what appeared to be irrefutable proof that Savannah had betrayed everyone's trust. His fingers trembled slightly as he tried to process the information. The company needed a quick response, and the consequences for any involvement were severe. "Maxwell," Lucas said, his voice firm but laced with visible anguish, "are you sure about this? Do you have concrete proof that Savannah is involved in this leak?" Maxwell didn't hesitate. "I knew she had been in contact with the competition for some time. And now, with these emails, it's clear that she has been using her position to benefit other companies." He looked directly at Lucas, his eyes sharp and calculating. "She doesn't deserve your support, Lucas." The coldness in Maxwell's words was palpable. He knew exactly what he was doing, bringing down Savannah without giving her a chance to defend herself. The blow was swift, precise, and devastating. Lucas felt the weight of those words, but his heart told him otherwise. He knew Savannah, and he knew she wouldn't do this, but the evidence, the images, the messages, everything pointed to her. He fought against something deep inside, something telling him that there was more to the story, something he couldn't see. But Maxwell's eyes were on him, and the pressure of the situation became unbearable. The next morning, what Lucas had feared came to pass. Savannah was called into the boardroom. Lucas's face was immersed in a mixture of pain and frustration as she walked in. She looked at him, expecting to see support in his eyes, but what she found was the coldness of a corporate decision already made. He didn't know what to say. He felt the weight of the lie being imposed on her, but he couldn't do anything. "Savannah Morgan," began the chief director, his voice cutting through the tension. "Based on the evidence presented, you are being terminated from the company for breach of trust and corporate espionage. Your position is being immediately rescinded." Savannah was in shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Every word felt like a knife cutting deeper. The pain wasn't just in losing her job. It was in the betrayal, the feeling of being discarded for something she had never done. But the worst part wasn't the decision. It was in Lucas's empty gaze, which no longer held any belief in her. He wasn't defending her. He had let her fall. "You're wrong, Lucas," she said, her voice trembling, trying not to give in to despair. "I didn't do any of this. You know who I am. You know me." But his words, or the lack of them, struck her harder than anything else. He didn't say anything. She knew he believed Maxwell's lies. She knew he no longer had the space to trust her. Suddenly, a wave of anger and frustration mixed with deep sadness washed over her. How could he do this to her? How could he believe Maxwell's lies? It was with one last silent look at Lucas that Savannah left the Whitmore Global building. She had been fired, but the pain wasn't just in losing the job. It was in losing something she had begun to believe in. That Lucas could be the exception, that what she felt for him was real. But at that moment, she realized he was no different from all the others. He had discarded her, and with that, she was left behind. As she walked out of the building, she felt a mixture of relief and revolt. She knew the truth would eventually come to light. She knew Lucas, even if now distant from her, would still believe in her. But for now, he was blind, and the corporate world, with its false morality, had turned its back on her. The pounding of Savannah's heart was the only sound she could hear as she ran through the darkened streets of Willow Creek. The world around her seemed to blur, the harsh lights of the city flickering in the distance as she sprinted, clutching the pen drive tightly in her hand. Every step she took was a battle against the fear that gripped her, a fear that she hadn't felt since the day Maxwell's lies had first stolen her life. But now, with the evidence in her possession, everything had changed. She could finally prove the truth if she could just get to the police. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she dodged between alleyways, each turn a desperate attempt to lose the men who were surely after her. She could hear the sound of footsteps behind her, growing louder and faster. The man in the dark hood had caught up with Hannah, but Savannah had been quicker. She had made it out with the pen drive, but she knew the window of safety was closing fast. She needed to reach the station and hand the evidence over. It was the only way she could stop Maxwell from using his power to silence her. She turned sharply onto a side street, weaving between abandoned cars and broken pavement, her pulse racing in time with the pounding of her feet. The alleyways were empty, silent, save for the thudding of her footsteps and the ominous sound of pursuit. Her breath was hot against the cold air, and her mind kept replaying Hannah's desperate words, urging her to run. "Run, Savannah, don't stop!" She didn't look back, but the footsteps grew louder, and the sense of being trapped settled deep in her stomach. She could almost hear their voices growing closer, menacing, relentless, determined. They wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. The entrance to the police station was only a few blocks away. She could see the glow of the station's lights in the distance, like a beacon of hope. But as she turned the corner, her heart sank. A dark car was parked outside the station. Its headlights flashed on as soon as she neared. Her eyes widened in terror as the car's engine roared to life, and the vehicle began to move in her direction, blocking the path she had hoped would lead to safety. She stopped dead in her tracks. The car came to a screeching halt just a few feet in front of her. The door opened, and a figure stepped out. A tall man in a dark suit. Savannah froze, her blood running cold. He wasn't one of Maxwell's henchmen, but she recognized the look in his eyes. He was a hired muscle, the kind of man Maxwell used to do his dirty work. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Savannah," the man said, his voice low and controlled. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you." Savannah's grip on the pen drive tightened. Her mind raced. She couldn't afford to let him take it, not after everything. It was her only chance to bring Maxwell down, to expose the lies and corruption that had stolen everything from her. "I won't let you have it," she said, her voice shaking but filled with resolve. She took a step back, weighing her options. She couldn't outrun him. She couldn't fight him. The only thing she could do was keep running. "Keep running, Savannah." Before the man could react, she turned and bolted down the alleyway again, hearing the footsteps behind her grow louder. She was almost there, so close to the station, but the fear gnawed at her, threatening to overwhelm her. Her legs burned with the effort of running, but she couldn't stop now. She had to reach the door. She had to get the evidence to the police. Just as she rounded the final corner to the station, the man's voice rang out behind her. "Don't make this worse for yourself." But it was too late. Savannah reached the entrance of the police station, stumbling into the lobby, breathless and panicked. She rushed to the desk, the pen drive still clutched tightly in her hand. "I have evidence," she gasped, holding it out to the officer at the desk. "Evidence of corporate corruption. It's everything. You have to take it now. Maxwell Whitmore. He's guilty of everything. Please, you have to listen to me." The officer looked at her in surprise, confusion flickering in his eyes. But then, without warning, a heavy hand landed on her shoulder. She spun around to find the man in the suit standing behind her, his expression cold and determined. "She's lying," the man said to the officer, his voice firm. "She's unstable. You can't trust her." Savannah's heart dropped. She had no time to explain. She had to act now. With a quick movement, she shoved the pendrive into the officer's hand. "Please, just take it. You have to believe me." The officer hesitated, his eyes darting between Savannah and the man behind her. She could see the doubt in his eyes, but after a long, tense moment, he nodded. "All right, I'll take it." With a swift motion, the officer moved to the back room to begin reviewing the evidence. Savannah stood there, gasping for breath, waiting for the truth to finally surface. She had done all she could. Now, she had to hope that the police would take the evidence seriously, that they would see Maxwell for what he truly was. As she glanced at the man in the suit one last time, she knew this wasn't over. Maxwell would stop at nothing to keep his empire intact, but for now, Savannah had done what she needed to do. The pen drive was in the right hands, the truth was out there, and Maxwell would have to answer for his actions. The days after Maxwell's arrest were a blur of paperwork, interrogations, and a slow, careful rebuilding of Savannah's life. The world she had once known, filled with betrayal and lies, was now replaced with the looming task of healing, of sorting through the pieces of a shattered past. But amidst the chaos, one thing had changed irrevocably. Lucas. He was no longer the man consumed by the weight of his power or the shadows of his past. The violence of the final confrontation had broken him in some ways, but in others it had set him free. Free from Maxwell's control. Free from the lies that had bound him to a life he no longer recognized. And now, in the wake of everything, Lucas was beginning to understand who he truly was. Not the CEO of Whitmore Global, not the man who had built his empire on others' pain, but someone who had found the courage to love, to fight for what mattered. Savannah, too, was fighting her own battle. The evidence against Maxwell had been enough to clear her name, to prove her innocence, but the damage was not something that could be erased so easily. She had lost so much in this fight, her job, her reputation, and in some ways, even her trust in people. But what she had gained was invaluable. The truth, the justice she sought, and a love she had never imagined would exist for her. One quiet evening, weeks after the storm had settled, Savannah sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment, a cup of tea in her hands. The light from the window was soft, casting a warm glow over the room. She wasn't looking for answers anymore. She had found them. She had found herself, and in the process, she had found Lucas. The knock on her door was soft, hesitant. She knew who it was before she even stood up. Lucas. When she opened the door, he was standing there, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket, his eyes filled with the same softness that had once been so foreign to him. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low, but the words held a weight she hadn't heard before. A promise. She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He crossed the threshold, but he didn't move immediately. He just stood there, looking around the apartment, as if taking it all in. The room was small but warm, decorated with simple touches that spoke of the life she had built for herself. It was different from the cold corporate offices he had once inhabited, but it was real, and it was hers. "I owe you so much more than I can ever explain," Lucas said, finally meeting her eyes. "For everything you did, for believing in me when I couldn't even believe in myself, for helping me remember who I really am." Savannah didn't know what to say. She had heard the words, but there was a part of her still healing, still unsure if she could ever fully trust again. She had given so much of herself, and for so long she had been disappointed. But as she looked at him, she realized something. He had changed, not because of her, but for himself. He wasn't the same man who had walked into her life so many months ago. He had faced his past, and now he was standing in front of her, vulnerable and open, asking for forgiveness. She smiled softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. I'm not sure I can forgive everything, but I can't forget how far we've come, how much we've fought for this moment. For us. Lucas stepped closer, closing the distance between them. He reached out, gently wiping away the tear from her cheek, his hand lingering on her face, as if memorizing the moment. We don't need to rush it. I know we have time to rebuild, to make something real. Savannah's heart swelled with emotion. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be moments of doubt, moments when the shadows of their pasts would try to creep back in. But in that moment, standing in front of Lucas, feeling his warmth and sincerity, she realized that they had already overcome the hardest part. They had fought for each other. "I love you," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "I never thought I could say that, but I do." Savannah's breath caught in her chest, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself believe in something good. "I love you too," she whispered back, the words flowing freely now. "We've been through hell, Lucas, but we're still here, and that's enough for me." In that quiet room, with the fading light of day surrounding them, they shared a kiss. Soft, tentative, but full of promise. It was a kiss that sealed everything they had fought for: redemption, love, and the possibility of a future that they would build together. And as they pulled away, the world outside didn't seem so daunting anymore. Savannah had found her truth, and Lucas had found his. Together, they would rebuild step by step until the past was nothing but a distant memory. For the first time, Savannah believed that she could let go of the fear and embrace the love they had found. And in Lucas's eyes, she saw that he was no longer the man of power and lies. He was simply the man who had learned how to love and to be loved in return. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the small Café Livraria. Savannah stood by the counter, her hands busy preparing a fresh pot of coffee. The comforting aroma filled the air, mingling with the scent of the old books that lined the shelves. Her life had taken an unexpected turn, and now, standing in the place she had built with her own hands, she felt a deep sense of peace. The Café Livraria was more than just a business. It was a symbol of her resilience, of the journey she had taken to rebuild her life after everything had crumbled. She had found strength in the pages of the books that surrounded her, in the small victories of each day. And now, with the return of her brother Noah, she felt a part of her life that had been missing for so long fall into place. Savannah glanced over at Noah, who was sitting at one of the tables, flipping through a book with a concentration that made her smile. He had grown up in ways she never imagined, but his presence was a comfort. He was here. They were together again. After so many years of searching, of hoping, she finally had him back. The family she thought she had lost forever was finally whole again. Lucas, standing beside her, caught her eye. His gaze was soft, filled with a quiet understanding. He had been there for her in ways she hadn't expected. And now, in this new chapter of her life, his support meant more than words could express. "You did it," Savannah said, her voice filled with emotion. She reached out, her hand gently touching his. "You really brought him back to me." Lucas smiled, a slight blush creeping up his neck. "It was the least I could do. I knew how much Noah meant to you, but it's not just about me. It's about you, Savannah. You've built this place, this life, and you did it on your own. I'm just glad I could help you make it even better." Savannah's heart swelled with gratitude. There was no doubt in her mind that without Lucas's support, she wouldn't be where she was today. But it was more than that. It was his belief in her, his unwavering presence, that had allowed her to dream again. And now, with Noah by her side, she felt like everything was finally falling into place. As the evening wore on, customers came and went, some taking books off the shelves, others enjoying their coffee, but the three of them remained in the heart of the Café Livraria, a quiet bond forming between them. Savannah had rebuilt her life with hard work, determination, and a bit of luck, But now, with the return of Noah, she knew that her journey wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about living, about cherishing the moments that truly mattered. She looked at her brother, smiling softly as he laughed at something Lucas had said. For the first time in a long time, Savannah felt at peace. The past had been hard, filled with betrayal, heartbreak, and loss. But now she had everything she needed. She had love, family, and the promise of tomorrow. As she watched the two of them, she realized that this was the beginning of something new. The Café Livraria, once just a dream, was now a reality, a symbol of her resilience and the future she was creating with those she loved. And though the road ahead would still have its challenges, Savannah knew one thing for certain: she was no longer alone. With a soft smile, she stepped back, allowing herself to enjoy the moment. This was her life now, and it was exactly where she was meant to be. "Noah," she said, walking over to him, "I'm glad you're here." He looked up, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I'm glad to be here too. It feels like home." Savannah smiled, her heart full. This is home, and it always will be. As the final customers left for the night, the three of them stood together, their silhouettes cast against the soft light of the cafe. The promise of a new beginning was in the air, and with each passing moment they grew closer to the future they were meant to have, together. The Café Livraria was more than just a business. It was their home, their haven, and the symbol of everything they had overcome, everything they had built together. And as the night settled in around them, Savannah knew that the love they shared would carry them through whatever came next. With a heart full of hope, Savannah looked at Lucas and Noah and whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." The months that followed Lucas's public renouncement were some of the most transformative in both his and Savannah's lives. It wasn't easy, not by any means. There were challenges ahead, questions about the future, and doubts that crept in when the weight of their pasts pressed too heavily against them. But through it all, they were no longer facing the world alone. They had each other, and that made all the difference. Savannah's Café Livraria continued to thrive, now filled not only with books and the scent of coffee, but with the soft hum of people coming together to share stories and moments of their own. It had become a place where community was built with every page turned and every cup of coffee shared. But more importantly, it was a place where Savannah felt she had finally found her true calling, not just as a businesswoman, but as someone who had rebuilt her life from the ground up, piece by piece. Lucas, on the other hand, found his purpose anew. The decision to leave Whitmore Global had opened his eyes to what truly mattered, the life he could create with Savannah, not the empire he had once built alone. He wasn't a CEO anymore. He was simply Lucas, a man who had found redemption and a second chance at life, at love. He became involved with the Café Livraria, not just as a silent partner, but as someone who wanted to help in the everyday small ways that mattered most. He'd take on the responsibilities of keeping the books, helping with renovations, and even learning how to brew the perfect cup of coffee. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and that was enough for him. Together, they made a home in the little Café Livraria, a home filled with warmth, understanding, and the promise of tomorrow. They were no longer bound by the power struggles of their past. Instead, they created something grounded in love and simplicity. And in this simplicity, Savannah and Lucas found a deep peace that neither of them had known before. They had each other, and that was the foundation of everything. One late afternoon, as the sunlight poured through the cafe windows, Savannah stood behind the counter, organizing a stack of new books that had just arrived. Her hands were busy, but her mind was at ease, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly content. As she looked up, she saw Lucas entering, a smile on his face as he approached her, holding something behind his back. "Another surprise?" Savannah teased, raising an eyebrow playfully. He smiled and pulled out a small bouquet of wildflowers, their vibrant colors a sharp contrast to the everyday chaos of the cafe. "For you," he said simply, "because I want you to know that every day with you is worth more than I could ever explain." Savannah's eyes softened as she took the bouquet, a warmth blooming in her chest. She didn't need grand gestures. What mattered was the quiet strength of their love, the understanding they shared, and the way their lives intertwined so seamlessly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "Thank you for giving me this second chance," Lucas replied, stepping closer and taking her hand in his. "Thank you for showing me what truly matters." They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, hearts open, with nothing else needed but the quiet understanding that they were home. Together. It wasn't the life they had once expected, and it wasn't without its struggles, but it was real, and it was theirs. The truth was no longer something they feared, but something they had embraced, the truth that love, real love, had the power to heal, to rebuild, and to transform. As the days passed and the seasons changed, Savannah and Lucas continued to build their life, one step at a time. The Café Livraria was more than just a business. It was a symbol of their journey, of the mistakes they had learned from, the love they had fought for, and the future they had finally found together. And no matter what the future held, they knew they had each other, and that would always be enough. Their story was no longer one of loss and betrayal, but one of second chances, of redemption, and of the quiet, unshakable truth that love, when it's real, always finds a way. And with that love, they were ready to face whatever came next. Together. Always. The path of Savannah and Lucas was never easy. It was marked by losses, betrayals, and difficult choices. But through their journey, they discovered that true love isn't just made of happy moments. It's made of courage, redemption, and the strength to start over, together. The Café Livraria, simple and cozy, became the reflection of their lives, something built with patience, hard work, and above all, genuine love. What began with pain and deconstruction now blossomed as a new chance, a new beginning for both. Savannah knew that by Lucas's side, she hadn't just rebuilt her life, but also her trust, her hopes, and now she saw the future with a quiet certainty. Everything she needed was already there. Because in the end, what truly matters is not what you lose, but what you choose to do with what remains. And she had chosen to love without reservations, without fear. And so, a new family was formed, not by perfection, but by the courage to face the storms and bloom in the most unexpected parts of life. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? Your support is what allows us to continue bringing stories that move and transform.